I hadn't wanted to attend the conference in Atlanta in the first place. It felt like one of those mandatory professional checkboxes we're expected to tick off without asking too many questions. The kind of trip where the company foots the bill, but you pay in hours of forced enthusiasm and lukewarm buffet dinners. The emails from leadership painted it as a valuable networking opportunity. Yet, all I saw was 3 days of name tags, uncomfortable shoes, and that hollow smile you give when someone tells you where they're from and what they do for a living, a smile you forget the moment you turn away. Still, I went mostly because saying no had started to look like a liability at work, and partly because I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. I flew out early on a Thursday, landing in that thick Georgia heat that sticks to your skin even in the shade, and by mid-afternoon I was already regretting it. The first few sessions passed in a blur of acronyms and jargon, the kind of content designed more to justify travel budgets than to actually teach anything. I found myself scrolling my phone under the table, checking emails I had no intention of answering. It was during one of those evening mixers, the kind held in generic hotel ballrooms with too much ambient noise and not enough seating, that I saw him. I'd been reaching for a glass of white wine when I turned and locked eyes with someone I hadn't thought about in years, Tyler, my brother's old friend. The last time I saw him, we were all still kids in some sense, pretending we understood what it meant to be adults just because we had jobs and insurance. But the man standing in front of me now didn't look like someone caught between phases of life. He looked grounded, controlled, different. "Lauren?" he asked, his voice low and steady, as if he wasn't entirely sure it was me but had decided to risk it anyway. I blinked, startled not just by the sudden familiarity but by how much he'd changed. His hair was shorter, his frame broader, and there was something quieter about him now, not withdrawn exactly, but measured, like he didn't feel the need to fill space with noise. I nodded, laughing a little more than I needed to, and said something like, "Oh my God, what are you doing here?" He held up his conference badge. Speaker, behavioral psychology, patient bias, the usual dry stuff they stick right after lunch. We ended up talking longer than I expected. First at the table near the bar, then later, when most of the crowd had thinned out and the music dropped to a dull hum. He told me about consulting work that took him all over the country, how he'd been mostly living out of hotels and never quite staying anywhere long enough to unpack. I told him about the clinic in New Orleans, how we were finally funded for the trauma unit we'd been trying to build for years, and somewhere in there I mentioned Zach, my husband, without ceremony, as if casually inserting that detail would neutralize whatever energy might have been floating between us. But Tyler didn't flinch or shift away. He just listened, occasionally asking thoughtful questions, smiling in that soft way that makes you feel like maybe you're the most interesting person in the room, even when you're saying something as mundane as "we're still short-staffed." There was a moment, maybe just a few seconds, when I caught him watching me, not in a flirtatious or aggressive way, just looking a beat too long, and even though I didn't react, I felt it settle somewhere in the pit of my stomach. Back. In my hotel room later that night, I lay in bed staring at the spinning ceiling fan, convincing myself it had been nothing. Just old friends reconnecting. No tension, no subtext, no meaning behind the way his eyes had flicked to my lips when I was talking about patient turnover rates. I told myself I was imagining it, that I'd had a long day, that Zach had texted just before I walked in the door. Something sweet, a reminder to call his mom on Sunday, and that I loved him. And that was that. But when I woke up and saw a message from Tyler, just a simple "coffee before your panel," no pressure, I felt something I didn't want to name. It wasn't excitement exactly, and it definitely wasn't guilt. It was closer to curiosity, maybe nostalgia, but with an edge sharp enough to cut through the lie I'd been telling myself since last night. I went to meet him. And while I stirred cream into my coffee at a little cafe across from the venue, he leaned against the counter and said, almost as an afterthought, "You used to hate these things, remember? You'd sneak off to the library whenever we had to do group presentations." I looked up, caught off guard by how specific his memory was, and laughed. "Can't believe you remember that?" He shrugged. "You made it pretty obvious. You'd disappear for like 30 minutes, come back with a book, and act like it was normal." There was something comforting about the familiarity, and yet also something dangerously easy. He didn't ask how things were with Zach, and I didn't offer. We just talked, and at some point I forgot to pretend I was in a rush. I let the conversation stretch longer than it needed to, told myself it was harmless, that people run into people all the time and catch up, and nothing has to come of it. But even as I walked back to the hotel with my badge swinging around my neck, I knew something had shifted. Once I got back to New Orleans, things fell back into their usual rhythm, or at least it looked that way from the outside. Mornings started early with half-drunk coffee and Zach already on his laptop, buried in spreadsheets and client calls before I'd even finished brushing my teeth. He'd recently taken on a new role at work, and between the late nights, weekend, emails, and conference calls with people across 3 time zones, I was seeing less and less of him. Even when we were in the same room, it wasn't sudden, not the distance, not the silence, but the shift had been there for a while. Subtle. Enough to ignore. Convenient enough to excuse. I used to bring it up, ask him when we'd take a real vacation again, when we'd slow down long enough to remember what our weekends used to look like. He always answered with good intentions and poor timing, next quarter or after. This campaign, or just let me get through this month. I stopped asking. A week after Atlanta, Tyler messaged me on Instagram. It was a meme, something stupid, probably didn't even make sense out of context, but I often that. Laugh came out faster than I expected. I replied. He sent a video from his hotel room, showing the world's saddest vending machine dinner. I sent one back of my cat knocking over a glass of water on purpose, like he always did when he thought no one was paying attention. It started like that. Small things. Fleeting things, conversations that could be explained away as innocent. If anyone had seen them, which, of course, no one did, we started messaging daily, then calling a couple nights a week. The first few times, I told myself it was just to talk, just a friendly check-in. Sometimes I answered while folding laundry, or doing dishes, speakerphone on, hands moving, voice casual. We joked about work. He teased me for still drinking the same coffee I used to bring to study sessions back in high school. I asked if he ever unpacked his suitcase yet. I didn't realize how often I smiled when his name lit up my screen, or how natural it started to feel to share the small in-between parts of my life with someone who actually seemed to be listening. Zach didn't notice. Or maybe he just didn't want to ask. When I talked to Tyler, my husband would usually be in the other room, pacing during the call, or sleep on the couch with his laptop half open beside him. I told myself that mattered, that I wasn't hiding anything because no one had told. Me, I had to. But something was changing, even if I refused to say it out loud. With Tyler, the conversations felt easy in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. No expectations. No logistics. No conversations about what was wrong with the garbage disposal or why we still hadn't finished the guest room. There were no sighs, no tension buried under "we'll talk later." Just the strange, electric kind of closeness, like we'd picked up a thread we didn't realize we'd dropped 10 years ago. One night, after a particularly long day at the clinic, I got into bed early and called him without thinking, phone pressed to my cheek as I lay in the dark. We talked for almost an hour. He told me about his weird dinner with a client who ordered a cheeseburger with no cheese and asked if it still counted. I told him about a patient who asked if our therapy dogs got paid. We laughed, the kind of deep, involuntary laugh you only get when your guard is down. I didn't even notice how late it had gotten right before we hung up. His voice went quiet for a second, and then he said, "You know, I always thought you'd end up doing something like this. Taking care of people. You were always the one who noticed when someone was off, even when no one else said anything." I didn't say anything right away. I couldn't. There was something in his tone I couldn't unhear. Not flirtation, not a confession, just ... Something honest. Something true. I mumbled a quick thanks, trying to keep my voice even, and said goodnight like it meant nothing. But when I hung up, I stayed awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling again. Only this time. It wasn't the fan I was thinking about, it was how easily I'd let someone else become the person I wanted to talk to at the end of the day, and how much I didn't want to stop. It started with a text, just like most things do these days. Simple, harmless on the surface. Hey, passing through New Orleans next week. Just one night. Would be nice to catch up in person. I stared at it for a while. Read it once, twice. I even typed out a reply, something breezy like, "Sounds good. Let me check my schedule," and deleted it. Then I did it again. Eventually, I just left the message unread, hoping that the unread bubble would somehow buy me time to think. A few days later, I replied, "Sud, I had a lunch meeting that afternoon, but could maybe swing by after. That I knew a quiet cafe outside the city, nothing fancy, just someplace without the noise and the crowds. He said that sounded perfect. No pressure. I told Zach I was going to meet a friend from college. I didn't give a name, and he didn't ask. He was on a call when I left, nodding at his laptop, mouthing something that looked like, "Good luck?" Though I wasn't sure if it was meant for me or whoever was on the other end of his Zoom screen. The cafe was small, tucked off a road lined with live oaks. Not the kind of place you'd stumble into unless someone told you it was there. Tyler was already sitting outside when I arrived, 2 iced coffees sweating in the Louisiana heat. He stood when he saw me, the way people only do when they haven't seen you in a long time and aren't sure how this is supposed to go. We hugged. It lasted maybe half a second too long. Or maybe I just noticed it more than I should have. The conversation started easy, like it always did. Work, weather, travel, traffic. I made a joke about how no one in this state can drive when there's a drizzle, and he laughed, nodding, but his eyes didn't leave mine the whole time. We finished our drinks and wandered down toward the water. The sky was turning to heavy, kind of gray, that humid late afternoon stillness that always comes before rain. We walked slowly, not touching. Not close enough for it to be obvious, just dot there. I told myself I was fine, that this was just 2 friends catching up, that it was perfectly normal to want to break from the usual noise of life and talk to someone who didn't expect anything from me. But at some point, we stopped walking. I don't remember why or how, just that we were standing near his car, parked under a tree, and the quiet between us had shifted. He opened the passenger door for me without saying anything, and I got in. Even though part of me knew I shouldn't have, he put on some old playlist. From his phone, something low, familiar, almost nostalgic in a way I couldn't place. And for a few minutes we just sat there, listening to the music, not talking. Then out of nowhere, he said it. "You were always different," he said. Quietly, eyes still on the windshield. Back then, I mean. You acted like you didn't care what anyone thought, but I think you just cared about the right things. I turned to look at him, and for a second, I didn't say anything. Because he wasn't complimenting me. Not in the way people usually do. He was remembering something real. Something I hadn't even realized I'd forgotten about myself. Before I could answer, he looked at me, not rushed or hesitant, just direct. And then he kissed me. It wasn't dramatic. No music swell, no sudden gasp. Just a moment that came and went. His lips on mine, soft and certain, and me not pulling away. I didn't kiss him back right away, but I didn't stop him either. I let it happen, not out of impulse, but something quieter. Something more dangerous. Something that had been building quietly in the background, gathering strength every time we talked. When it was over, I stepped out of the car without a word, closed the door gently, and started walking toward my own. He called after me, said my name once, not loudly. But I didn't turn around in the driver's seat. I sat for a full minute before starting the engine. My hands were shaking, just slightly. So I held the wheel until they stopped. I told myself I'd just made a mistake. That it was a moment, a lapse. A flash of something I'd never let happen again. But as I drove away, I felt this strange, burning kind of heat under my skin. Like I'd opened a door I wasn't ready to close. I didn't tell anyone about. The kiss, not even myself, not really. I boxed it up fast, shoved it somewhere deep, and filled the space with routine. Morning coffee, work meetings, texts with Zach about what to grab from the grocery store. But everything felt slightly out of sync, like someone had nudged the picture frame of my life just a few degrees off-center, and no matter how many times I adjusted it, it wouldn't hang quite right. Then Tyler emailed me. It wasn't personal. At least not officially. The clinic was hiring outside consultants for trauma case reviews, and his name had somehow ended up on the short list. HR made the intro, but his message came directly to me. Friendly, professional. Heard there's an opportunity to collaborate. Thought I'd reach out. I should have said no. I drafted the email. I even hovered over send for a full minute before deleting it. Instead, I replied, "Would be good to have someone sharp on the team for once." He joined under a short-term contract, part-time, remote mostly, but with on-site days scheduled twice a month. Just enough to stay visible, just enough to make things complicated. At work, we kept things neutral. Eye contact when necessary. Small. Talk in front of others. Nothing you could point at and say, "That's suspicious." but underneath, the tension pulsed like a second heartbeat. I'd catch him looking at me across a meeting room, and the air would tighten. He'd brush past me in the hallway, too close, not close enough, and I'd feel the heat of something we weren't saying. Zach never suspected. If anything, he seemed relieved I was finally talking about work again with something resembling energy. He'd say things like, "You've seemed more focused lately," or "Glad you're enjoying the new team." I nodded, smiled, kissed him goodnight, and lay awake staring at the ceiling in silence. The worst part wasn't what had happened. It was what hadn't, that charged space between me and Tyler, the not quite touching, not quite saying, started to feel more real than anything else in my life. It made me feel present, awake, but also hollow in a way I couldn't explain. I was lying to everyone, including myself, but I wasn't ready to stop. Happened late in the day. One of those Thursdays that drags at its own weight, where every hallway in the clinic feels strangely quiet and time seems to slow down for no clear reason. A storm had passed through earlier, knocking out power across parts of the city, and by the time our building's lights flickered once and then failed completely, most of the staff had already packed up and gone home. I'd stayed behind finishing up end-of-week reports, and Tyler had been working 2 rooms over, catching up on case notes he said he hadn't had time to process properly. At first, neither of us said anything about the sudden darkness. We just kept working under the soft gray light coming in through the windows, the way people do when they're pretending everything is still fine, still normal. The silence was almost comforting, stretched thin across the dim floor like a blanket. We both agreed not to disturb. Eventually, I closed my laptop and stood, stretching out the tightness in my shoulders as I turned toward the doorway. Tyler was leaning against the desk by the window, arms crossed, posture relaxed but eyes locked on mine in a way that wasn't casual. There was a tension there, not aggressive, not inappropriate, just dense, like something unspoken had been. Building quietly and was now too heavy to ignore. "You good?" he asked, his voice low and steady, as if he already knew the answer and just wanted to hear how I'd try to frame it. I nodded and said I was just tired, though even to my own ears, the words sounded off, too simple, too easy. He didn't respond immediately. He just stepped toward me, not fast or abrupt, but with that deliberate kind of closeness that makes you hyper-aware of the air between 2 people and how quickly it's disappearing. The floor felt still beneath me, but everything inside me had started to shift, like my body already knew what was about to happen before my brain could catch up. "I think about that day," he said after a pause, his tone quiet but sure, like the thought had been sitting on his chest long enough to gain weight. "The day we met up outside the city. I think about it more than I should." There was no confrontation, no screaming match, no slammed doors or shattered glass like the movies always promise when everything falls apart. Instead, there was a white envelope on my desk. No note, no handwriting, just my name printed on. A sticky label, the kind we use for patient files. For a moment, I thought it was clinic paperwork someone had left for me. But when I opened it, I found photographs, 3 of them, printed on glossy paper, the kind that catch light when you tilt them. Each photo was quiet, unremarkable in isolation. Me and Tyler standing outside a coffee shop near the subway. Me, laughing, hand lightly on his arm. Him leaning just slightly toward me. There was nothing explicitly damning, nothing that screamed affair or betrayal, but together, the photos told a story that couldn't be explained away with a quick smile. Or a clever lie. It didn't say who took them. It didn't have to. Amy never said a word. She never followed up. She didn't need to. Her silence had already said everything weeks before, and now, the envelope was just her way of handing the truth back to me and stepping out of the way. Didn't show the photos to Zach. I didn't have to do that either, because 2 days later, I came home from work and found his closet half empty. Drawers left open like someone had been moving quickly, but not carelessly. There were no passive-aggressive notes, no dramatic text, just a voicemail that said, "I'm staying at Emily's for a while. I think we both need space. I'll call in a few days." And that was it. He didn't accuse me. Didn't demand answers. Just left. In that moment, the house didn't feel quiet. It felt hollow, like something had been carved out of it. I sat down at the edge of our bed, the sheets still creased from that morning, and tried to remember when the last honest conversation between us had happened. I couldn't. I wanted to cry, but nothing came. The next day at work, Tyler didn't show up. No warning, no message. HR said he'd stepped away from the project. Personal reasons, I didn't reach out. Not because I didn't want to, I did. But because I knew if I did, I'd be reaching for something that had already started dissolving before I was even brave enough to admit it existed. Everything had collapsed. Quietly. No fireworks, no flames. Just silence. And in that silence, I realized I was alone. Not just without Zach, not just without Tyler, but with myself. Stripped of every distraction I'd used to keep from feeling what I didn't want to feel. The worst part wasn't that I'd lost them. The worst part was that I didn't know if I wanted either one of them back. I sat in that truth for a long time. And for the first time in months, there was no one left to lie to.